July 1987. A wild month that gave us Appetite for Destruction blasting on boomboxes, Thor rocking his battle armor, and the X-Men facing off against the Avengers in one epic showdown. But wait, is Magneto the villain we love to hate, or is he something more? With Soviets, charred Asteroid M tech, and world powers on edge, this issue doesn't hold back. Stay tuned as we unravel twists, the team-ups, and the behind-the-scenes drama that almost changed this story entirely. Trust me, you don't want to miss this deep dive into Marvel madness. Let's dig in. Marvel's The X-Men vs. the Avengers #4 hit store shelves and spinner racks in July of 1987. It is the finale of a 4-part miniseries, which was the first of its kind for these two teams. The hunt for Magneto focuses in on the island of Singapore. After charred remnants of Asteroid M, Magneto's secret base from a bygone era, begin to rain down on Earth, he leaves his fellow X-Men behind and races to uncover the technology. The Avengers are called in as the world doesn't completely trust Magneto or the X-Men. Soviet super soldiers get involved in the hunt, and suddenly the entire world is on edge, as Magneto is seemingly back to his old evil ways. Initially, Magneto had planned to remove prejudice and bigotry toward mutants using the power of Asteroid M technology and his helmet. However, after doing so to Captain America prove that not all humans hate mutants, he surrenders to the World Court. Magneto is eventually found not guilty of his crimes and is released. He faces an angry mob and an unknown future for him and all mutants worldwide. The story continues in Avengers 285 and Uncanny X-Men 220. It is worth noting that X-Men vs. the Avengers 1 through 3 were all written by Roger Stern. However, this issue was credited to Tom DeFalco, who is listed as co-plotter alongside editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. Apparently, Stern and DeFalco had issues over the ending of the story. The original plot for this issue would have had Magneto reveal his intentions and shift back into his true villain role once again. The various hero teams would set aside their differences and unite to fight Magneto and his plot to brainwash all of humanity. DeFalco was in fact Marvel's 10th editor-in-chief at this time, as he was promoted in April of 1987, but only effective in comics dated November and afterwards. He served from 1987 to 1994, making him one of the longest-serving individuals to hold that post. This issue was penciled by Keith Pollard. Pollard is best known for his simultaneous work on the Marvel titles The Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Thor in the late 1970s and early 1980s. In 1982, Pollard moved to DC Comics, where he drew part of Wonder Woman 300. In 1987, he returned to Marvel, where he had a second run on Fantastic Four with writer Steve Englehart. That lasted until 1989. Inker Joe Rubinstein started his artist career in the early 1970s as a teenager, primarily working as an inker. His artwork has been published by major U.S. comic publishers including DC and Dark Horse. One of his most important works has been inking the official handbook of the Marvel Universe over a span of 20 years, for which he holds a Guinness World Record of inking more pencilers than any other inker. Inker Bob McLeod is best known for co-creating New Mutants with Chris Claremont. In 1987, he inked Mike Zeck's pencils on Kraven the Last Hunt storyline in the Spider-Man titles. At DC Comics, he was the first artist on Superman in Action Comics in the early 1990s, including the Dark Knight over Metropolis story arc. Inker Al Williamson has had a long-running career as both artist and inker, working for both DC and Marvel, where he inks such pencilers as John Buscema, Gene Colan, Rick Leonardi, Mike Mignola, Pat O'Liffey, John Romita Jr., Lee Weeks, and many others. Williamson won 9 industry awards for Best Inker between 1988 and 1997. Inker Al Milgrom has worked as a writer, penciler, inker, and editor, primarily for Marvel Comics. Milgrom started his comics career in 1972 as an assistant for inker Murphy Anderson. Milgrom came into prominence as a penciler on Captain Marvel from 1975 to 77. He served an 8-year stint as the inker for X Factor in 1989 to 1997 and is the co-creator of DC superhero Firestorm. Colorist Christy Max Scheele is an influential American artist known for her work as a comic book colorist and fine art painter. She began her career in comics with Marvel, thanks to connections with industry professionals like Denny O'Neil. Scheele made a significant impact as a colorist, particularly on over 100 issues of Daredevil, collaborating with legendary artists like Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. She also contributed to Moon Knight with Bill Stankiewicz. Her coloring style emphasized harmony and composition, bringing depth to her storytelling. Her nickname Max originated in 1982 as a playful moniker from letterer Denny Crespi and stuck throughout her career. Letterer Joe Rosen has worked on such titles as The Fantastic Four, Captain America, Daredevil, Spider-Man, G.I. Joe, The Incredible Hulk, The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, and X-Factor. He also lettered the DC Marvel intercompany crossover book Superman and Spider-Man. Rosen has worked for Fawcett, DC, and Harvey Comics. Beginning in the 1980s and throughout the rest of his career, Rosen worked almost exclusively for Marvel. In 1975, he began lettering Daredevil. Rosen would work on 127 issues of the comic for over 16 years. His brother Sam Rosen is also a longtime Marvel Comics letterer. Mark Gruenwald worked for Marvel his entire career. Gruenwald was promoted to full editorship by Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter in 1982. His responsibilities included the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Spider-Woman, and What If. Gruenwald was famous for his perfect recollection of even the most trivial of details. Editor Ann Nocenti is best known for her work at Marvel in the late 1980s as editor of Uncanny X-Men and the New Mutants, as well as her run as writer of Daredevil. Illustrated primarily by John Romita Jr., Nocenti has created such Marvel characters as Longshot, Mojo, Spiral, Blackheart, and Typhoid Mary. Nocenti specifically addressed societal issues with Murdoch, now running a non-profit urban legal center, confronting sexism, racism, and nuclear proliferation while fighting supervillains. Nocenti introduced the popular antagonist Typhoid Mary in issue 254, as well as the demon Blackheart in issue 270. Despite his success in revitalizing Marvel, editor-in-chief at the time Jim Shooter angered and alienated a number of longtime Marvel creators by insisting on strong editorial control and strict adherence to deadlines. Shooter occasionally found himself in well-publicized conflicts with some writers and artists. Creators such as Steve Gerber, Marv Wolfman, Gene Colan, John Byrne, and Doug Moench left to work for DC or other companies. Shooter was fired from Marvel on April 15, 1987, but is still credited on this issue. Channel 11 News Singapore does not exist. By 1987, there were at least 5 different channels broadcasting in the region. Currently, Singapore's #1 news channel is CNA, formerly called Channel News Asia. By the way, the text on this panel translates to Luo Bingishi Medical Gandiao. Text on the right appears to be gibberish. This issue is printed on thicker paper than what is typical for this time. Most comics printed from the early days until the early 90s were 4-color process printed on newsprint, same as newspaper comics. There were some comics starting in the 70s that were printed on better paper stock. Marvel liked to call them prestige editions sometimes. They used a much thicker paper stock in that newsprint. Sharp-eyed readers may notice Thor's intricate armor in this issue. This is known as his battle armor. At first only used as a tool to protect himself from a curse brought on by Hela, Thor's battle armor was often used during periods of war. Did you know he also donned a large beard to cover the scars on his face brought on by Hela's curse? The first version of the armor Thor owned was eventually destroyed during an intense battle on the planet Pangoria. It is presumed Thor soon after rebuilt the armor, as he wore it once again to fight an evil duplicate of himself after being weakened by another curse, this time placed on him by Loki. Siblings, am I right? Marvel's first go at an X-Men vs. Avengers crossover ends with a slight whimper as opposed to a bang. The 4-part series was primarily written by another team before DeFalco and Shooter took over duties for this last issue. Unfortunately, the glaring change of tone and voice is evident here, as it appears the storyline was building up to something vastly different than from what was eventually published. Far from turning Magneto back into his full villain role, the writers decided he would give himself up to the world courts, only to then counter their authority by declaring himself outside their jurisdiction. This clearly seems to have been a last-minute editorial decision by Marvel and ruffled more than a few feathers. Glaring story pivot aside, this issue was drawn, inked, and colored beautifully by the team mentioned earlier. This is a rare case where 4 individual inkers were used. However, McLeod, Williamson, and Milgram are credited as additional inkers. I'm not the biggest fan of the cover by Pollard and Rubinstein, as I don't often care for the floating heads look. These often look comical to me, as is the case here. Near mint issues of this comic are going for $60 on pricecharting.com, and I am seeing one issue selling for $22 on eBay. In 1987, there were roughly 789,000 comics published between a relatively few number of publishers in the market. The majority of these comics were Marvel, and the top title was X-Men. X-Men dominated the sales of comics for 10 out of 12 months in 1987, the only outliers being the highly anticipated Punisher #1, released in March, and Amazing Spider-Man from June, which featured the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. Just a year prior, in 1986, Marvel's parent, Marvel Entertainment Group, was sold to New World Entertainment, which within 3 years sold it to McAndrews and Forbes, owned by Revlon executive Ronald Perelman. For more on what Perelman did to the company, check out one of my previous videos. The ads in this issue are a mix of junk food, toys, and entertainment, the three essentials to any adolescent diet. Mars was promoting M&Ms, while Oreo and Disney were cross-promoting the Mickey Mouse Club. Tang was offering swag in return for Tang labels, and some cash, of course. I mean, who wouldn't want to be the big orange big shot? Leaf was promoting Rainbow and Super Bubble candy, and TSR was advertising Dragonlance, the Magic of Kryn novel. The book is a compilation of 10 short stories from various authors taking place in the fictional world of Kryn. And New World Pictures was promoting a sequel to the R-rated House horror film called House 2: The Second Story. This PG follow-up was written by Fred Decker of Monster Squad, Night of the Creeps, RoboCop 3, and Predator fame. This week, I wanted to find a comic shop in Singapore where all the action of this issue takes place. If you are ever in the region, I suggest you check out G&B Comics, located at 809 French Road in Singapore, or check them out at comic.com.sg. Thanks for checking out this video. If you want to see more, please hit like and subscribe. If you have suggestions for comics you want me to deep dive into, please leave a comment below. Please help and support real artists. AI is great for a lot of things, but not for creating art and replacing artists. Thank you.